Good afternoon. You're watching News in Depth on TVP World. I'm Aaron Dahmen. Well, India and the European Union are in the final stages of sealing a breakthrough free trade pact that could see tariffs slashed on European-made cars. In fact, we're hearing reports from the South Asian superpower that talks have concluded, with a formal announcement possible by Tuesday. That would end almost 2 decades of negotiations over what's been called the, quote, mother of all deals by the European Commission. And here to break all of this down is our Europe correspondent, Alex Cadier. Hello to you, Alex.
Hi, Anne. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. 20 years of negotiations, this protracted back and forth, to say the least, between Brussels and New Delhi. So what, Alex, has pushed this mother of all deals over the line now?
Well, Aaron, necessity is the mother of all invention. That is really the simple answer to the question as to why the mother of all deals, as the Commission likes to call it, has made it across the line. Because you have a new world with Donald Trump, you have an increasingly aggressive China, you have an increasingly unpredictable United States of America, where the US's tariff policy can be changed in one social media post completely out of the blue, despite talks progressing well. If you take the EU and the US trade deal, for example. So on the one hand, you have the European Union worrying about getting stuck between a world where the US, China divvy up markets between each other. On the other hand, you have India, which has a lot of ambition, a growing middle class, a lot of course, a very large population, and a desire to modernize its economy and grow its economy, and therefore bring in know-how, boost its manufacturing sector, boost its economy, and therefore cooperating with the European Union, crucial for that. But at the same time, India facing its tariffs of its own from the United States that were thrown down, of course, by Donald Trump. So at the same time, these two have fallen out, the EU and India, over intellectual property rights, over services, over previous negotiations in this trade deal. But clearly that unpredictable world and that heat and unpredictability from the United States really focusing minds here in Brussels and over in New Delhi as well.
And we'll talk about Donald Trump's tariffs in just a moment. You mentioned the population. I mean, India and the EU make up 25% of the global population. So I guess the thing is, we've got the European Union, the world's single largest market on one side, and then India, the world's fastest growing major economy, on the other. On paper, is this a marriage that just makes sense?
Yeah, on paper it really does. You have the European Union, where growth is relatively flat, demographics are increasingly a challenge. There's that anxiety that I mentioned about being squeezed between the US and China, and therefore a need to diversify. We've seen that argument made by the Commission when it comes to the Mercosur trade deal. I'm sure we'll come back and touch on that in a moment, but also on that partnership with India, which is seen as the world's largest democracy, a partner that, at least on values, on language, that the European Union can work with relatively eye to eye. And then on the other hand, you have India, as I mentioned. For them, it's not just a trade deal, it's also a standard setter. It's also being able to bring in European companies, European know-how, to modernize India's economy, to grow India's economy in a way that is more sustainable and makes it more competitive for the future. So in some ways, you have different reasons to come to the same conclusion on both sides. On the European Union side, a very well-established market, a very big market, if a slightly stagnant one, needs more export destinations because their export partners are less reliable. On the other hand, you have a new, dynamic, growing, hungry market in India, needing that know-how, needing to modernize its supply chains. And so, to put it very clearly, very frankly, if you are a big Indian business and you want to grow and you want to have international standards to what you make or the services that you provide, being able to trade with the European Union is a real gold standard of being able to do that. And then you can bring in European know-how on how to modernize your supply chains. If anything, European companies know how to make very modern, very sophisticated factories, engineering, machinery, these things very much desired in the Indian economy.
Let's talk about standard setting, because I want to run through one of those reported big-ticket headlines. That's the slashing of those famously high tariffs on cars imported from the EU. We're looking at possibly as low as 40% from as high as 110%, including the likes of BMW and Volkswagen. You mentioned modern factories. Those two companies definitely a part of that. I mean, is this as dramatic as it sounds, or is this, as you mentioned too, this standard setting, this careful calculation by India to open its market?
Well, I'm going to go down a notch, Aaron, from dramatic, and I'm going to go down to it's a big deal. The reason why it's not this huge dramatic shift where now you're going to see Volkswagens and Renaults and Citroëns and Peugeots and other European cars flooding into India is that there are some really serious caveats. Now, on the face of it, this is a very big drop for those very high tariffs. The Indian car market is one of the largest in the world, but also one of the most protected, particularly because India has its own car manufacturers. Now, there are two caveats to this drop in tariffs. It is only for cars that are more than 15,000 euros. So that, of course, knocks out a big chunk of the kind of cheaper competition from Europe. That, of course, because Indian car makers are fighting very much in that lower end of the range. But the future of Indian car makers will be fighting on EVs. And on battery-powered EVs, clearly there is an exemption here. So this tariff reduction does not apply to electric vehicles coming from the European Union because it is very much seen as the market of the future for Indian car manufacturers, and therefore they've had that carve-out put in this deal. Nevertheless, it still leaves a massive window for Volkswagen, for BMW, for Mercedes, for Renault, for Citroën, all these big European car makers who want to export more, who need more places to export to. That window of over 15,000 euros for a car will still be very appealing and therefore motivate them to perhaps manufacture, but at least certainly export more to India and, simply put, make more money for European companies.
I want to come back to these Donald Trump tariffs. Of course, India's faced 50% tariffs from President Trump since August. When we look especially at India's textiles, jewellery trade, for example, putting aside the cars for a moment, I mean, has Donald Trump ultimately forced India's hand in making deals elsewhere? And I mean, how much does the global south, yes, India, but also China, see these gates of opportunity opening?
Well, look, India's foreign policy, trade policy has always been a multipolar, multilateral, a foot in every door policy. India does not want to be seen as fully aligned with the East, the West, the North, the South. They're not interested in playing that game. They want to be trading and therefore relatively aligned with as many different powers as they can. But the economics speak for themselves. The numbers speak for themselves. If you're talking about textiles and jewellery and you are the Prime Minister of a very large democracy where a huge number of people are employed in textiles and jewellery, and that is an industry that is very export dependent, you're not going to hang around very long to find other export destinations. And there again, we have an export destination in the European Union, the biggest market in the world. Really appealing for those Indian companies who now, for them, it's completely not feasible to be exporting to the US with those tariffs in place. And so you have that fit and that opportunity based on those US policies. So there is an opportunity for India on this global south opportunity point. As we said, Brussels is looking for diversification, not just because it wants to abandon the US, but because you have a new world dynamic of these centers of influence, these hemispheres. China trying to have its influence in Asia, the US trying to take over the American hemisphere as the US sees it, the US administration sees it, and therefore Europe has to punch up and try and find a space for itself. A great trade deal with India is a way to do so. So too is a trade deal with South America, but more on that in a minute.
You said India doesn't like to particularly pick a side. It likes to sit on the fence. Of course, the elephant in the room, and somehow I think we've managed to avoid saying the name, Russia. Just last month, Vladimir Putin, Narendra Modi, they met in India. The two countries reportedly are set to reach $100 billion in bilateral trade by the end of the decade. Alex, before we go on, I want to play you this clip from that meeting.
Excellency, your visit holds great historical significance. It has been 25 years since 2001 when you first assumed responsibility and made your visit to India. That moment laid the foundation for a strong and enduring strategic partnership between our two nations. For me personally, it is a matter of happiness and honor that my relationship with you also spans 25 years. The role you played in 2001 reflects how a visionary leader thinks and acts. The strength and depth of the India-Russia relationship stand as a testament to that vision.
A testament to that vision. Narendra Modi sitting side by side with Vladimir Putin. How can the EU reconcile making deals with a partner also trading with an alleged war criminal? I mean, trading with a man waging a war on the European continent.
Well, I'm going to paraphrase a very well-known expression, Aaron, rather that they be inside the tent, facing out than outside the tent, facing in. That is the logic. Now, you're absolutely right. If there is one topic European officials in Delhi will not really want to talk about, particularly because they've been the guests of honour at Republic Day, and it's quite a spectacle, and it's a spectacle of Europe coming to see India putting its best foot forward. They don't want to talk about the fact that Russian oil gets refined in India and then sold on and kind of evades European sanctions. They don't want to talk about the fact that one of India's most consistent security and defence partners has been Russia. Russian weapons being bought by the Indians for decades now. But clearly, there are two options on the table. Either you accept the fact that India is a multipolar actor, they want to be friends with as many people as possible, and you try and get closer and closer, and perhaps once you move forward, you have a trade deal, they value your market, they value your partnership. Maybe then you become more valuable than Russia. Maybe then you can introduce European defence companies to the Indian Ministry of Defence, and therefore slowly start edging Russia out. Or you can try what the Donald Trump approach has been, which is whack them over the head very, very hard and hope that they do what you want them to do. We have seen, if you take the example of India and the US tariffs, the United States administration wanted India to act in a certain way, and if they didn't, they would be hit with tariffs. They hit them with tariffs, and now India is negotiating a trade deal or reviving and getting almost to the end of a trade deal with the European Union. So you have a choice. Either you work with India, either you trade with India, there's an economic benefit to the European Union, or you decide that this is a red line in the sand. Clearly, Brussels officials have decided that trading with India, trying to get closer to them, is more important. We have seen this argument made by Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, who said, look, we don't understand what the Europeans are doing because they're financing a war that they're also trying to stop. By making a trade deal with India, a country that the US has put tariffs on, the Europeans are effectively looking the other way when it comes to refining of Russian oil. But at the same time, European companies need to export, they need to export to India, and therefore there's a balance. Brussels is choosing this trade deal over hitting Delhi over the head about Russia.
I mean, the fact that these leaders, they won't want to be talking about Russia while they're in New Delhi, but will they be thinking in the back of their minds about the fact that this lures India away, potentially, from closer political and military ties with Russia? I mean, is that even a possibility, or is that a fantasy, given these enormous numbers we're talking about?
There's a baby bathwater situation here, Aaron. You do not want to effectively have the horse bolt before you've even saddled it. This is really one of the issues and one of the balances that clearly the officials here in Brussels travelling to New Delhi have decided to strike, which is effectively, if you go in guns blazing, there are two things that clearly would ruffle some feathers in New Delhi if you talk about them. Number one is the relationship with Russia. The European officials have expressed concerns about that. They've spoken to their Indian partners saying, hey, we really wish you wouldn't do so much business with Russia. The other, of course, is human rights abuses within India, something that I've been speaking to Human Rights Watch about earlier today, and they said, look, clearly the Commission has decided to completely look the other way when it comes to freedom of the press and the political opposition to Narendra Modi in India. Those are two key factors where the European officials have decided, actually, if we push too hard on this, if we criticise Narendra Modi too harshly on this, if we criticise the Indian government too harshly on this, we may lose the whole thing. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's try and build these relationships first, because we are now in a world where it's might is right, and therefore we need more friends than before. We will have to look the other way on Russia and human rights abuses in India.
OK, so we know that on the other side of the world, the EU is again facing hurdles to wrap up the protracted Mercosur trade negotiations with South America, even at the same time that these Indian negotiations are underway. Are things moving forward? Have they stalled? What's the state of play?
Well, we have a beautiful system in this legislative process in the European Union that something can feel like it's stalled, but it's also moving forward at the same time. Let me break down exactly where we are.
That's not the answer I want, Alex.
Mercosur, on this trade. Well, I'll give you, if you give me a minute, I'll give you the answer you want, Aaron. Things are somewhat moving, but somewhat stuck. It depends on the member states, it depends on the Commission. Let's break it down. The Mercosur trade deal has been moving forward. If you think the India deal was long and 20 years in the making, 25 years in the making for Mercosur, it got to the point where the European Parliament, the directly elected body of the European Union, has decided to send that deal for judicial review. The Mercosur trade deal is going to be reviewed by the Court of Justice of the European Union to see if it complies with EU treaties, with EU law. Now, you think, OK, that sounds perfectly reasonable. Why not? We like things to be done by the book. But that process can take 2 years. And so the European Commission and some member states are considering whether or not, well, you know what, let's just carry on with this deal, and if the court has an issue with it, we'll try and make some tweaks behind the scenes afterwards, try and tweak things as we go. We know that Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, is absolutely pushing for this to happen, other countries as well. But you've got serious opposition to Mercosur. You have concerns from farmers in Poland, in France, in Italy, who are really worried about cheaper agricultural products flooding into the European market and therefore being unfair competition to their already very hard-pressed businesses. Some experts will say, well, actually, the sanitary rules of the European Union mean that most Brazilian beef, for example, cannot be exported here, but maybe those things changed and is more competitive, is more challenging to European farmers. To answer the question in a much shorter way, it is moving forward. There may be a review by the court which slows down the process, but eventually it does seem this deal will make it over the line. One perhaps negative for the European Union, if you're looking over from Delhi and you go, actually, if a few farmers show up in Strasbourg or a few farmers show up in Place Luxembourg, just a walking distance from here at the European Parliament in Brussels, then actually this whole trade deal can be delayed, can be put off until the machinations of legislation move forward in Brussels. But then the perspective there is, yes, it's slow, for sure, as Emmanuel Macron likes to tell us. Yes, it needs to be reformed, for sure. But would you rather be trading with a partner where these things are slow and very technocratic and process-driven, or do you want to trade with a partner whose trade policy is defined by a social media post? Therefore, European officials say that there is clearly an appeal to trading with Europe and not others.
I must say, Alex, an excellent way of breaking down the EU bureaucracy and the back and forth. While I have you, the European Commission has today launched an investigation into Elon Musk's X over the production of sexually explicit images, that's including child abuse materials. Here's European Commission spokesperson Thomas Regnier.
Today, the Commission is opening an investigation into Grok under the Digital Services Act because we believe that X may have breached the DSA. We have seen over the last weeks and months anti-Semitic content. We have seen non-consensual deepfakes of women, and we have seen child sexual abuse material. In Europe, no company will make money by violating our fundamental rights. One will argue that X has limited this to premium subscribers. Let's be very clear, child sexual abuse material is not a premium privilege. Because such output has no place in Europe, and we need to protect our citizens from potential future harms. This is why this investigation into Grok will allow us to look deeper into the matter to protect our women, our children, and our citizens.
Now, Alex, we're running out of time, but is this another chapter in the EU's battle with big tech? And what can Brussels, this is what I'm interested in, what can Brussels actually do to crack down on such practices when it's an American tech giant here at play?
Well, it's an American tech giant operating in Europe with European users under European law, Aaron, and so the European Commission can do quite a lot when it comes to X, particularly that X has been the ugly duckling of the social media world when it comes to its relationship with the European Commission. It has been confrontational. You have seen Elon Musk in the past tweeting expletives against European Commission officials. That's probably the most diplomatic way and tele-friendly way I can put it. What can the European Commission do? It can fine X up to 6% of its global turnover. Now, it hasn't done that yet, but it can do that per infringement. So you have this investigation into Grok, you have a previous investigation opened by the Commission and now extended by the Commission into disinformation and harmful content on the platform. That could be 6% once and 6% another time for both investigations. That is an enormous amount of money of global turnover. It can also force X to make design changes to its platforms if the platform is really refusing to comply. Now, at the moment, the first step is going to be the European Commission going back to officials at that platform, at X, and saying, look, we need more information from you. You need to give us data. You need to give us information on what went wrong and what you're doing to fix it. If the Commission feels like X isn't engaging constructively and productively, and if you look at Elon Musk's social media feed, you could say that he is not the most constructive and productive partner for the European Commission. If the Commission judges that X is really not trying to comply, not trying to make an effort to respect European rules that protect European users, then it can look at design changes, it can look at fines, and this clash between X, the European Commission, other large social media companies, for now, despite frustrations in Washington, really isn't going anywhere, Aaron.
Much to watch. Europe correspondent Alex Cadier, thank you as always for your time. And that's all for News in Depth here on TVP World. Do stay with us for more news and analysis. I'm Dahmen. Goodbye for now.